Hi, and welcome to this edition of Let's Talk. This is a show where I try to introduce you to some of the very interesting people who live in our community. I think everybody in our community is interesting, so I could be doing this for many years. My guest today is David Filer. David comes from a long East Hampton lineage, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But first, I just want to introduce you, David, and let's talk about your family and growing up in East Hampton and all of that stuff. I'm going to show you the first. I always ask my guests, if you haven't seen the show before, I always ask my guests to bring or send me photographs so we can talk about their life through the photos. So the first photo is this photo right here, and who is that?
Well, thanks for having me on, Barbara. It's good to see you, as always. I did send you a few photos that we've kind of pulled out of the family archives. This one here is my dad on the left. His name was Lloyd Filer. He was born here on the left, well, I'm sorry, the kind of blonde kid, the small one.
This one's your dad.
Is my dad, Lloyd, who was born in 1919, so during the sort of World War I years. And on the other side, the taller child is my uncle Gerald Filer, who was also born here, and he was born in 1914, I believe, in East Hampton. And they grew up around Newtown Lane and Sherrill Road. Ultimately, their father had a dairy farm that ran between the area of Newtown Lane. There's a barber shop there now. There's Tom Cooper's yogurt business.
Used to be Vigneri's barbershop.
Exactly.
I don't know what it is now.
My grandfather was born in that building. The Vigneri's barbershop was a small house.
Yes.
And they owned that building as well as the larger building next door, which is a commercial building now. There's an art gallery, but it's a big
It was
house.
A house, yeah.
Sort of probably late 1800s house, but that was the Filer property.
Okay.
And their farm, they farmed like everyone in East Hampton at that time. They were farmers and fishermen, depending on the time of the year. But their property ran from that area of Newtown Lane down all the way to Cedar Street area. And they had some other properties around the village where all these local families would farm.
Between the two streets,
Between essentially what's now Osborne Lane, which was an Osborne farm, of course.
Right.
And Sherrill Road, which was a Sherrill farm. And those lanes are roughly the borders of where the property would have been.
Okay, so your father's family owned the property between
The two
the
streets.
farm, between those
Exactly.
two streets,
And
okay.
then down towards some land off of Cedar Street, as well as some land up off of Egypt Lane, some land kind of near Wyborg's Beach. And, these folks were planting cauliflowers on what's now oceanfront property. So
Right,
it's sort of
right.
an interesting
I remember
evolution of the property.
I've had people ask me why the village lines are so odd.
Right.
And I try to explain to them that, a lot of the farmers didn't want their back 40 to have to pay for police, fire or whatever.
That probably explains why
And
some
that's
of the,
exactly why the village ends
Yes.
where it does.
Exactly.
In different places, because it's a very odd line, but a lot of it was the farm fields
of course.
beyond, which they didn't want to. They could opt in or out. People could
Right.
opt in or out
Right.
around the village when it was first
Exactly.
incorporated.
And now
So-
it's created these sort of jurisdictional boundaries that don't make sense to us,
Right,
but they would have to
exactly.
these folks.
At,
So,
at that time,
yeah,
and
yeah.
a good example, I think, is the house where the village has offices now.
Sure, the Beecher House?
No,
Or I'm sorry, on Osborne Lane.
Yes,
Yes,
Mr. Osborne's
Of course,
farm.
that was an Osborne house.
And that was his
sure.
house, and his
Yes.
property went back there, and so it
Exactly.
ends right there. The village ends right behind the house, because he said, I don't want
Well,
my farm property in the village. I don't
Exactly, I don't wanna pay those
pay
taxes.
more taxes,
Exactly,
all of
right.
that story. So that's
No,
why.
and that's exactly the property we're talking about. And as most people know, the early settlers of East Hampton, the sort of 17th century settlers, all lived around Main Street, that sort of centralized location that we think of near Guild Hall, near the East Hampton Library, what's now the East Hampton Star, Town Pond, et cetera. And I think, and Filers lived there on Newtown Lane, on Main Street, along there between Guild Hall and what's now the Presbyterian Church, the big white church, but probably moved up to Newtown Lane at some point for more land,
Right.
right? Because that area up on Newtown Lane was not built upon, and there was
Right.
probably more pasture land and so forth, so.
That's why it's Newtown Lane, because
Exactly,
that's the new
exactly.
street. Main Street was originally called Town Lane,
Correct.
and so Newtown Lane was the new street that they put in.
Exactly,
to expand,
exactly.
yeah.
So the filers would have started on Main Street, and then sometime when you're seeing these folks, my dad and my uncle's grandfather would have been the one that moved up to Newtown Lane,
Right,
to the area where we're talking
okay.
about. Yeah,
And this is,
yeah. Okay, that's my father there in the sort of flannel shirt, and that's his young sister, Jean. She was Jean
Mhm.
Filer, with her dog, and it looks like I don't know if it's a baby carriage or some sort of a wagon. It looks like more like a wagon.
it does
pulling
look like
her
a
in.
wagon, yeah.
And the house you see in the background still exists pretty much in that, looking just like that on Sherrill Road.
Cheryl,
Right,
yeah,
on Sherrill
I
Road. It would be
recognize
the
that house.
would be the east side of Sherrill Road, and that's actually the house that my mother grew up in. My
Oh,
mother grew up
interesting.
across the street from my
Well,
father.
that's the way it used to work.
They were not related, but thankfully, but
Yeah.
but she did grow up in that house, and it's still there. It's a
And,
great old house.
Seimer was her name, right?
She married a man from upstate New York whose last name was Seimer, and he
Right.
was a pilot in World War II, flew over Germany.
I
and-
remember him, fascinating man,
Yeah,
very nice,
interesting
very nice man.
Yeah, really had a lot of interesting stories about World War II, and went to college on the GI Bill, and later
Yes.
became a electrical engineer and did a lot of interesting work. And they kind of divided their time between the house that she grew up in on Sherrill Road and up west where
I
he
love
had
the
his
dog.
company. Yeah, they
It
all
looks just
had
like the one in
dogs.
the ad for the RCA, or whatever, right?
Exactly,
It's
exactly.
exactly like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Okay,
So that's
so
Jean.
let's see, and this is.
Okay, so those are the three Filer children, so the including my father. So my
Uh-huh.
father's in the middle, Lloyd, and then the oldest boy is Gerald above him, and then
It's
my
Jean.
aunt Jean below. And that's their house on Sherrill Road, which is still there. It's number 17. And it is there. My cousin lives in it, which is really
Mhm.
nice. She inherited it from her mom. So
Nice, that's a great
Yeah.
picture,
yeah,
that's a great picture. Now, who are these?
that's their parents. So that
Okay.
would be my paternal grandparents. So
Mhm.
my grandfather was Hugh Chase Filer, and then his wife was Bertha Filer, and she was a Bertha Latham. She was from Orient Point.
Oh,
Sort of, she grew up where the ferry is now that
Uh-huh.
goes to Connecticut. So she's from the Latham family,
she was a
which is
come-here.
which
That's
is
what
still
they call
there.
them
Yes,
now, right?
exactly. So my grandfather, found someone to marry from outside of town, which was good.
From
It was
outside
as
of
far
town,
away
right.
as Orient.
That's
And,
good for the gene pool.
Exactly. So she grew up over there, but that's their house on Sherrill Road, which again my cousin lives in now. So
Okay, let's see what we have here.
okay, now we go to the other side of my family. It's my mother's parents, and they're the Hatters, Hadder. That was John Calvin Hatter, and his wife Ethel. His family was from the eastern shore of Maryland, and she was from Michigan, and I believe she moved here as a school teacher,
Hmm,
and he came here to work for the railroad in some capacity at the station, which of course was fully staffed
Sure.
then. Railroad came through in
So
1894, okay,
maybe, I
exactly.
think, about
Because it cut through
1894.
the Filer property,
Right,
so I think they were forced to sell the
mm,
access for the railroad to go through.
right,
And so this is the house on Sherrill Road that was pictured in the earlier shot. And John Hatter, this is my maternal grandfather, he later operated an ice business when
ah,
East Hamptoners needed ice to
That's a big
refrigerate
deal,
their
yeah.
their food. And that ice business was a warehouse that is now just
on 114?
no, it's just west of the East Hampton train station. The phone company had a
Oh, okay,
warehouse
where the
there, and
phone
now I
company
think
is?
one of the local pool guys maybe owns it, but
Okay.
it was a warehouse where ice was stored and
Okay,
sold from. Yeah,
Huh.
so
and they were in East Hampton since the railroad, is that when they came, or?
I assume that he came some point in the earlier part of the 20th century.
Okay,
So, and I think their two families weren't from here. So on my mom's side, those two had
Right.
moved here.
Yeah,
Unlike my dad's side.
my
which
mother-in-law, came when her father came with the railroad.
I
So
think
I
the
think that
railroad,
was
right, I think the railroad brought
a lot
some
of people,
employment.
exactly.
I'm sure some people were happy about it and some people weren't, but it certainly brought a lot of goods into the area.
Well, it's good to get new DNA in the.
Absolutely, and probably help them get their fish to market
Right.
and that kind of thing. that,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, okay, so
Okay,
this
so now
looks
we
like
move
the
to
same
architecture.
building, right?
It is the same
Yeah.
building.
So tell
So
me about this.
the older black and white picture that features the horse in
Mhm.
front of it is my grandfather Hugh's barn, and I imagine it was his father's barn. His father was a man named Henry Chase Filer, who operated this farmland as well before my grandfather. And that would have been their main barn, their dairy barn, where they would have milked cows and so forth. And that barn, I don't remember this. I was born in 1962, but sometime in the late 60s, my grandfather would have retired from farming, and he sold his barn to a man who was very interested in converting it to a house and to a shop, and that's that picture you see on the right,
And
which
where is
which
that
has
now?
the color. That is in the Hampton Waters area of East Hampton. It's
Okay.
up very close to 3 Mile Harbor, and it's owned by a terrific couple named David and Jeannie Stiles. And the Stiles have written a couple of dozen books about barn building, building tree houses, building sheds, and this has been their kind of life's work. And they live in the barn still. It's a second house for them. We recently visited them and got a tour, and it's just amazing to see. He's really kept it quite
Oh, that's great.
rustic, and points to the areas of the barn that apparently my grandfather told him, certain horses were here and, what they did in the
Do you know
various
what
areas. So
what the barn dates back to, what the original?
I'm guessing if it was my great-grandfather's, sometime in the 1800s.
Late
and
1800s
yeah,
maybe.
exactly. I'm thinking later 1800s.
It's a
yeah.
beautiful building.
Very simple, sort of classic New England architecture barn. And yeah, and Mr. Stiles has really kept it
It's
wonderfully.
great.
So it's great that he's
It's nice that
preserved
it didn't, nice it didn't end up
yeah.
in the dump.
Right, absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, now who's this?
All right, so now this
know
is,
who that
that's
is.
my father there on the left in the lighter shirt. And that's my uncle. That would be my mom's brother. His name was Jack Hatter. And this kind of captures the hunting or gunning tradition in East Hampton. You see they have waders on, or hip boots. They would have, my uncle's holding a shotgun, and there's hunting dogs all around them. So this would have been a sort of typical shot of them probably going out to hunt ducks or geese in a swampy area.
It's hard to believe now that when we went to high school, the guys would come from hunting with their shotguns on the back, in the back of the car, right up on the rack, and it's a whole
People thought
different
nothing
world.
of it, right?
People
Yeah,
thought nothing
right.
of
And of
it.
course, it was a huge part of the tradition of the community, and that's
Absolutely.
it's just what they did.
I love the high boots and
Yeah, and of course there was a lot more open space then.
Yes.
It was
a lot more
different
places to
times,
hunt.
Yeah.
And this is your folks.
That photo is my parents, I think somewhere in the city, somewhere in New York, probably out on the town, because they've got my mother looks like she has a large cocktail in front of her,
Yes.
and a cigarette in her right hand, and an
You can
ashtray.
tell it
and
must have been the
I was
50s.
gonna say, I think it was before my time, and yeah, it looks like they're out
It
at
looks like the
out
50s to me.
some sort of restaurant in the city. So, yeah.
Huh.
I think you're right. I think probably 50s.
I
Is a
mean,
good
that
guess.
was the
They
look
were
in the
they were
50s.
married in I believe 54, so it could
Yeah.
have been right around that time.
Everybody, I remember my parents having a lot of ashtrays. They weren't smokers, but
But
they
they
had
had- because I
ashtrays
guess
because
everyone they
everybody who
had,
came to
right.
visit, they had to have
Exactly.
ashtrays. It was a
Another
real
way
different
the
time.
times have changed. Yes,
Times have changed a
exactly.
lot.
Oh no,
And
you're
this
going to
is
show
you.
that one. I'll admit that's me.
I
I don't
remember
know.
you because I babysat for you. Full
That's
disclosure, I
funny, yeah.
babysat for David when he was about 2. I think you're a little older than that here.
Yeah, hard to guess, but I obviously had more hair then, not, a little younger, so.
David's mother was a piano teacher, and she gave me piano lessons in exchange for me babysitting for you after school
there was
while
a-
she taught other kids.
So there was a barter system.
So I was
Okay.
probably, you were 2 and I was probably 12, or, I mean, she
That's
was in the
terrific.
house, so it wasn't like I was
Right,
alone,
right,
but
she
I
taught,
I played with you in the other room
Well,
while,
that's terrific.
yeah.
She,
You don't
she
remember that,
taught
but
lessons in the house,
in
right,
the house,
exactly.
right, I
Yeah,
remember very
yeah.
well,
Yeah,
so.
that's great.
And, okay, now this is your family.
Oh, there's a more recent shot.
That's a more recent shot.
That is my lovely wife Ashley on the left,
Mhm.
who was brought up in London
Mhm.
and lived in London for about 20 years and then moved to New York and was in New York about 20 years, and we met actually in Brooklyn. And that is my son Nate. And Nate is now 17, and that picture's maybe a year old. And that's of course me on the end holding a chicken. So Nate's a senior in high school.
So what you didn't do was send me any photos between here and here.
Exactly.
So I wanna know a little
Sorry
bit
about
about
that.
in between.
What happened between?
Yeah, what happened?
so-
Where did you go? What happened? to you?
Sure. So yeah, the last picture there is a more recent one here in East Hampton. I went to college, went to school locally in the public schools here. Graduated from all the East Hampton schools, and ended up in college at a small liberal arts college in Virginia called Lynchburg College, now University of
I know
Lynchburg.
Lynchburg.
And came back to East Hampton initially for a couple of years, worked in the insurance business. If anyone remembers Bob Denny and Pete Diefendorf, worked for
Sure.
what was then the Edward F. Cook Agency. And that was a great, sort of post-college job, get some experience in business. And I ended up going back to graduate school. I got certified to teach, got a master's in education, taught for a couple of years down in Virginia, and got interested in buying and renovating old houses, did a little bit of that down there. And anyway, eventually came back up north, and I was in the book selling business for a bunch of years, probably over a dozen years. We had my cousin Donna, who I grew up with here in East Hampton, and I had a mail order bookstore. This is in the pre-Amazon days, or
Right.
pre-internet days, I guess you could say,
You're ahead of your
if there
time.
was such a thing. Yeah, and had a great time doing that. Sold bookstore where we advertised mainly in magazines and sold by mail order. And then after several years or a bunch of years doing that, I ended up going to law school, and that's what kind of sent me into a different career. And I settled in the city, in New York City. I'd gone to school at Brooklyn Law, and I was hired right out of Brooklyn Law by Mr. Morgenthau, Robert Morgenthau, who was the district attorney, legendary district attorney in the city he served for, I'd say, the greater part of 3 decades. And I spent over 16 years there, half of my time with Mr. Morgenthau, and then he retired, and got really some great experience as a criminal prosecutor, and that kind of led to I was in New York for 20 years, or just about 20 years.
So you haven't been in East Hampton your whole life? You really were gone for
I
quite
sort
a while.
I was born here and then kind of left and came back, and so I still, this is my hometown, and certainly have roots here, and which is great. But also spent a lot of time away, which is, gives you some perspective. But it's nice to be back. We came back here about 6 years ago, and I had decided it was, time for a change. I had been at the DA's office a long time, and came back here and went into private practice in Amagansett, and then about a year ago ran for the position of town justice, and I'm now serving as one of the 2 town judges here in East Hampton, which is great.
Do you enjoy that?
I do, enjoying it.
It's
greatly.
real different than private practice.
It's a lot different than private practice, but it actually reminds me much more of my time at the district attorney's office in public service. And most of my legal career was in public service, so I'm a bit more accustomed to that, I should say, and I missed it actually. So it's I'm enjoying the work and work with great people and really wonderful people.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been
And
great.
that's a fairly new thing. I mean, that was 2 years or?
That I'm about 11 months in
Oh, okay,
to a
only a
4-year
year.
term. It's a 4-year term. So
Okay.
yeah, so I'm
Great.
going on kind of finishing my first year. So
Well,
it's
that's
great.
really great.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it.
So tell me what your goal is. I mean, you've been all over the place. You've been,
Yeah,
I
I think.
mean, do you want to stay in law? You like what you're doing now?
Well, I
And
think, yeah, I really like what I'm doing now, and I'm certainly not. Yes, I'm here for the duration and anticipate certainly serving out this term, that I've been elected for, and we'll need to decide, if it's appropriate to run again 3 years from now. And but no, I love it, and we love East Hampton, and we like traveling to both my son Nate and my wife Ashley love to travel, so we like to go away some weekends. And
does Ashley have family in England?
Ashley's mother and brother live in London, so
Okay.
we do tend to go there. She goes at least 2 or 3 times a year,
nice.
and I join her, and Nate, we all join her when we can. So
Sure.
it's terrific.
That's
So
nice. Nice to have a place to stay.
it's terrific. That's been a great, yes, since we've been married. It's nice to be able to.
So do you live
get
on
over there.
family property or?
Yes, actually, where we live on Osborne Lane is a small piece of that original dairy farm, pasture land between Osborne and Sherrill. And I was fortunate enough to inherit the house that I grew up in. It was my parents' house. So we have what was, part of the old farm area. It's small, but it's, I have a garden, and we have chickens. And so it's nice to be on land that was essentially my great-grandfather's.
Yeah.
So
And you have some family here. Your sister lives here now.
my
and
sister has retired here,
cousins.
and cousins, so it's good to have come back and have relatives that we can get together for dinner, and so it's really nice.
That's nice.
And East Hampton's changed in many ways in the years that I've been gone, obviously, but in other ways it hasn't changed. I mean, it's still nice to be able to run into people that I know or I maybe grew up with, or we know from the Presbyterian Church or what have you. So in some ways it's very much still a small town, and in other ways it's not. So it's an interesting.
And you and I both grew up in the village, and there was a certain community in the village, that was a pretty tight community.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I miss those days.
Yes, and you get signs of it still existing in some ways, but
and getting to see people like you
Sure,
said that
yeah.
you run into the same people that
absolutely.
that your father knew or your mother
course,
knew, or
right. You
and,
have some-
and our mothers knew each other well. They were
Exactly.
good friends,
Yeah.
and so
It's nice to have those connections, and I think in a
Absolutely.
lot of areas of the country, those are hard to find.
Yes.
People move around a lot, and we live in a society where people don't always stay in one place very
Right.
long, and so it's this is unique in that sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
What was your favorite thing about growing up in East Hampton?
Probably things that I didn't appreciate at the time. I mean, just the sheer beauty of the area, the expanse of land, the view of the ocean, the view of the bay, and that ability to sort of just go down to the water whenever you want and take a walk. And I think sometimes when you grow up, you don't quite see how
Special
unique
it
it
is.
really is.
Yeah.
And now coming back here,
Did you do a lot of
it's
fishing,
meaningful.
hunting
We
when you
did
were a
some
kid?
did some fishing with my dad, not so much hunting. I mean, he certainly trained me to shoot and that kind of thing, but we didn't hunt per se. But now that I'm back, I'm actually enjoying going clamming. I'm actually gonna try to carve out a couple of hours late tomorrow afternoon and escape my
Nice.
office and see if I can get some clams. So it's fun. It's things that, now that I'm back here, I sort of appreciate a bit more.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, there's something
it's
about walking in the same place your great grandparents walked and
Yeah,
doing some of the
yeah.
same, right?
Absolutely.
I feel that connection a
Absolutely.
lot personally.
I definitely have that sense when I'm out trying to dig in the, garden, dig up
Mhm.
and planting things and think, gosh, this reminds me of watching my father do
Right.
this in the same kind of area.
Yeah, there's something very
uh,
special about having
yeah.
the roots, literal
Sure,
roots
right.
here,
And I
that.
think especially as I get older, it's not something I would have thought about, even 20 years ago,
Mhm.
probably. So
Yeah,
it is nice to
it is
to,
great.
um,
And you knew
have
all your
that connection.
grandparents, which is nice.
I knew the one that I really remember was Hugh, my
Mhm.
my father's dad. My grandmother was alive when I was born, but again, I was
I
too
don't remember
young.
too
So,
well.
but my mom's parents were both gone. Actually, my sister, I think, remembers, or one of my sisters remembers at least one of them. But I
Mm.
was the younger one.
Yeah, you were
So
the youngest in the
yeah,
family, so you don't
yeah.
have this, I find that
And
with.
now you wish they were all around so you could ask a
Yeah,
lot of
right, because
questions
you could
about.
ask,
Yeah.
mine were around for a long time, and I still think of things I wish I, because you don't
Exactly.
think of those things when you're young,
No, you
it's like,
don't.
when you get older, you wish you knew certain
Absolutely,
things,
yeah.
but.
You wish you could tell, younger people to go ask but it's
Exactly.
not things that you think about at that
Yeah.
point. Yeah.
So I like to end my interviews with a question that James Lipton used to ask, and I don't know if you ever watched Inside the Actors Studio?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
he did
sure.
his whole series of questions.
Right.
I just asked one, and that is, when you get to the pearly gates, what would you like to hear God say?
Gosh. I think I would like to have him or her say, you've lived a productive and active life, and that you've maybe given more than you've received. And I already feel like I've had such a fortunate sort of life in terms of my career and my family, and so I'm very appreciative for what I have. So I don't feel like I have any regrets. So I guess I'd want to hear confirmation of that. But no, it's all good. It's all good.
Yeah, this was a
yeah,
great place to grow up.
It is.
East Hampton was a great place to grow up. We were very lucky to grow up here when we did.
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, I still
yeah.
think my grandkids are lucky to grow up here as well, but
Yeah.
they won't know some of the things that we knew.
Right.
for
They'll
sure.
know
They'll know
different
different
things and
things.
different experiences.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it does change with
It does
time.
change.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much,
Of
David.
course,
I've
this
really
is great.
enjoyed this.
Appreciate being asked.
It's my
So.
pleasure. I just want to thank my sponsor, Marshall and Sterling Insurance of East Hampton, and I want to thank the staff at LTV for the good work they do here, and to LTV for providing public access television for us here in East Hampton, and especially thanks to my guest today, David Filer.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
having me. Great to talk with you.
My pleasure.
Thanks so much.